When I retired from working full-time for the National Health Service in Britain 4 years ago, for various reasons, at the age of 65, I didn't have to retire then, I really wasn't ready to stop working. So I wrote to the professor, who was known to all his English friends as Dev, and I said, would you like me to come out to Kathmandu and help train some of your team? And he said, please come. Well, the man was just a sort of ball of fire. He was extraordinarily energetic. There was never a dull moment with him. He was an extraordinarily dynamic person, and to create an entire specialist neurosurgical hospital more or less from scratch was a quite extraordinary achievement. I remember before his illness, sitting down with him in his beautiful garden and saying, you know, what happens? This was horribly prescient. I said, what happens if you drop dead tomorrow? What will happen to the hospital? Fortunately, he had some very good trainees, and in recent years he had been given them more and more, not exactly independence, but they were doing more and more of the work. So they were, fortunately, able to take over the workload when he fell ill, and they've coped remarkably well. If you have a relatively impoverished government, and if people are reluctant to pay taxes, it's very hard for the government to be able to afford good quality healthcare. Therefore, doctors working in expensive specialist areas like neurosurgery end up setting up their own private hospitals. You then end up with all these separate private hospitals, which are basically locked in economic competition against each other. Ultimately, with commercial healthcare, the patient becomes the means to the end of making money. Whereas at the other extreme, if doctors are only paid fixed salaries in a state system, in theory at least, in theory, that the end of everything you're doing is the well-being of the patients, and making money is not relevant. I think it's a wonderful hospital. I love coming here. Clearly the transitional period following Professor Devkota's death is very difficult, because we all know that he had a magnetic, he was very famous and was like a magnetic attraction, and patients came from all over Nepal to see him, often without neurosurgical problems. What strikes me is the way the hospitals survived. You know, one might have thought it would completely collapse once he had gone, but that's not the case at all. Very major problem in Nepal, apart from the poverty, is the poor infrastructure. You can get patients fairly quickly from rural areas to central hospitals. That is often impossible in Nepal. So you have to compromise, and you have to have probably a slightly greater degree of peripheral small hospitals out in the rural communities than would happen in wealthier countries with with more favorable terrain. If you wanted to design a country to have difficult problems, Nepal is that. We all know being landlocked is a major problem for economic development. Having all these mountains and adverse geographical features makes life difficult as well.